So first off, Amy, I know you had a massage, so you are feeling hunky-dory and excited to talk about SIBO root causes.
Yeah,
Which shall we take a deep dive on first, my dear? Dealer's choice.
Yeah, let's do low stomach acid PPIs. I think that's a great one to dive into.
This one can be mighty controversial, right? And Lord knows the GI world loves to prescribe PPIs. They give them out like candy. And I do think that that's a huge problem, that a lot of people might not need them. I think that there are cases where if you have a geyser of a bleeding ulcer, as my mom once had, that's a case where maybe a PPI is appropriate as part of the treatment of that.
Yeah.
But I think that they are prescribed very willy-nilly, and it drives me bonkers that now you can see, what is it, Prilosec is available over the counter, and you can just pick it up at any Costco, Walgreens, Walmart.
Where it's like, oh, you have a gut issue of any sort, why don't you try PPIs first? Which, to me, again, some of them are not situations where PPIs should be prescribed, in my opinion. You know, it's bloating or like SIBO, IBS type symptoms, like diarrhea, and they're prescribing PPIs. There's nothing really indicating a PPI would be effective, and it's just a very knee-jerk. And I think a lot of like general practitioners do it too. When people come in with general GI discomfort, they'll just be like, well, let's try a PPI first before we do anything else. And it's like, try a PPI and then refer to a gastro. I feel like it's the general trend that I see. But I do think I agree with what you're saying, it being a controversial topic, because I know we've said in previous podcasts there was a lot of meta-analysis and studies confirming or more correlating that, you know, PPIs lead to higher risk of SIBO. But then you have newer studies that are saying, no, they don't, or saying like there's not a correlation. I think even like the newer Mark Pimentel study was saying, you know, there's not as much correlation with change of small intestinal microbiota with PPI. It's a very, I think, weird topic, and you don't know if there's like powers that be. I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist here.
Oh, I'll go there if you don't want to go there.
Okay.
For sure. Like,
good,
yeah, I mean,
good. I'm glad you're here.
I think I would guess if you dug deep enough, you could find that some of them had conflicting interests or ties with these studies that are saying, no, bro, you're good. Because that does seem to be the consistent theme in more recent studies is, you're good. Keep taking the PPI.
I do think, like, even if for some reason there was no correlation, which I think there's a lot of evidence in just understanding how the GI function works, like, it doesn't make sense that there wouldn't be a correlation. But even if, you know, let's say that there isn't a higher risk of SIBO taking PPIs, there's still tons of reasons not to take PPIs as well.
Totally.
So I feel like there's this kind of attitude too, where it's like, oh, these PPIs are totally fine now, like, you know, to take for people with SIBO, like, go for it. But then it's like, okay, you might not get SIBO, but you might get all these nutrient deficiencies, higher risk of infections, like all these other issues that come along with PPIs. Like, it's not optimal to be on PPIs long term, regardless of it if it's correlated to SIBO or not. That's a frustrating part too, because I feel like in some of the studies I'm reading, it's like, oh yeah, like, thank God it's not correlated, because now everyone could be on these PPIs if they need it. And I'm like, yes, there, like what you were saying, there's definitely a time and place for PPIs, but man, the amount that are typically used is way overkill.
I think that they are overprescribed. And even if if your prescriber prescribes a PPI, there also needs to be a conversation of, okay, so am I on this for the rest of my life? Or is there a game plan to come off of it? And I do find that it's not explicitly said, oh, hey, this is a forever thing now. Going to the ridiculous scenario of, okay, if you have a 30-year-old who's on a PPI, is she going to stay on that until she's 98? Like, is that the goal here? Because if you're not having a conversation of some sort of strategy to get off of it, then that's kind of the implication that that person's going to be on it until the day they die, which is preposterous. I really, truly believe in my heart of hearts that this is a true SIBO root cause, to the point where I have questions about it on all of my paperwork for all new patients. I've talked about it on my online class quite a bit. There was a nice study. It's an oldie but goodie now, but it's a 2012 study, and it's titled Proton Pump Inhibitor Use and the Risk of Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth, a Meta-Analysis. And in this study, they said, particularly, subgroup analysis revealed an association between SIBO and PPI use in studies that use duodenal or jejunal aspirate cultures to diagnose SIBO. But no relationship was found between SIBO and PPI use in studies that used glucose hydrogen breath tests. Well, A, are they only testing for hydrogen and not methane? Because that seems to be part of the implication. B, breath tests, that might not be the best way to assess for SIBO. So they're saying that if you use the better test, which isn't super useful for us, like I'm not going to send people out for an aspirate, but it does paint the picture of, oh, well, maybe it is associated, but some of these newer studies might not be addressing this. And they even say right in the conclusion, PPI use was statistically associated with SIBO risk, but only when the diagnosis was made by a highly accurate test, duodenal or jejunal aspirate culture. So, that's something to chew on too, is that, are they taking into account the type of testing? Maybe there's been a whole slew of new studies in the last 2, 3, 4 years that have been funded by or influenced by the pharmaceutical companies, and now we're mixing all of that in with the previous data, and now it's looking like it's not statistically significant. But if they're not looking for the bias in the publications that they're using for the meta-analysis, then that kind of goes out the window, and the meta-analysis is not very useful now, is it? Research which is highly influenced by and funded by big pharma, I would be highly suspicious whenever they tell you, no, bro, keep taking your drug. You're good. Wink.
Yeah. Just from a understanding of how the gut works, I don't know how you can explain away how a PPI wouldn't affect the small intestines, because there's so many downstream effects that come from the pH of the stomach. So if the pH of the stomach is not low, like it should be, like your stomach acid is low essentially if you're taking a PPI, because it's going to limit your stomach acid. If your stomach acid's low, you're going to have less or a higher pH chyme, which is coming out of the stomach. And when you have a higher pH, which basically means like low acid base. Yeah,
like a neutral pH, closer to 7.
Yeah, closer to a neutral pH. When that's coming out of the stomach, you're not going to get, bile flow or bile release. You're not going to get pancreatic enzyme release. You're not going to potentially get MMC and motility processes running either if the stomach acid's low. So I just don't understand how it could not be connected, just from a basic understanding of how the gut works.
Oh, yeah. And I think in the last podcast, we busted out some of the nutritional deficiencies. I mean, B12, iron, magnesium, practically anything is up for grabs, because that's where digestion starts, really. It starts in the mouth and even before you put the food in your mouth, but a lot of the enzymatic processes really start with that acidic stomach, and you're breaking down that food. And I also don't get, I don't get how PPI use and stomach acid, becoming less acidic, I don't see how that couldn't be involved with SIBO. A, because of just baseline human anatomy and physiology knowledge, but also microbiology. I didn't love my microbiology class in undergrad, but I think I remember enough to think that microbes care about pH quite a lot.
100%. Yeah.
So you're going to favor the growth of different kinds of bacteria. Clinically, I've definitely seen cases where A, the patient is struggling with SIBO, and, they've done antimicrobials, they've done Xifaxan, they've done whatever, and nothing seems to stick until we get them off the PPI. And in some cases, get the stomach acid boosted. And we get them on things like betaine HCl, or we get them chewing their damn food. So there have been plenty of cases where, people feel stuck. And I'm the first person to go, maybe we should get you off the PPI. Let's talk to your prescriber about that, because you've got to do it safely. But here's some licorice and stuff. Here's some herbs to help coat the stomach. Here, let's work on the root causes. And then that gets the ball rolling. And then they're finally able to get over their SIBO when literally nothing else has worked. And then similarly, I've had cases, and one comes to mind right now, one of my favorite patients, relapsed and got diagnosed with SIBO again because she went back on a PPI. And I was like wanting to shake her through the telephone when I saw her on my schedule. I was like, and I could call her because I would tell her this to her face. I'm like, Suzanne, why are you calling me? Why are we on the phone right now? And she's like, oh, Dr. D, I got diagnosed with SIBO again, and I'm constipated. The methane's back. I'm like, but what's been going on? And she happened to mention, 2, 3, 4 months prior to calling me, she got some reflux. She went to her GI doctor. They prescribed a PPI. She was on it for about 2 months. Boom, the SIBO came back. And now here we are. And I'm like, okay, so goal 1 is we're getting you off of that safely with your prescriber, et cetera, et cetera. But that's goal number 1. And then we'll talk about treating the SIBO. Why didn't you call me? And I gave her so much shit for not calling me first. But I have seen patients, and she's not the only one, but she's the one that comes to mind, where people do seem to relapse and get SIBO again after they get back on a PPI. And I even had one case where it seemed to happen with Zantac too. But I think, I've seen enough of those cases where it really truly has convinced me that this can be a root cause for a lot of people.